First story. She told me she didn't want me to go on the trip when we had a much needed family vacation to Mexico scheduled, and she took my two girls and her mother for a week trip instead. I paid for the entire trip months in advance because she was a stay-at-home mother. I stormed into a lawyer's office as soon as I was certain the plane took off on schedule. The day after they returned home, I served her with the papers. Second story. Because I told my wife I didn't want kids before we were married, as I told her seriously while sitting her down. After 2 years of marriage, she asked, "Don't you think it's about time to start having kids? I want to play with my kids, after all." She remarked, "I assumed you were joking," when I brought up our talk. Being married to her when she wanted children and I didn't wasn't fair. We eventually got divorced and separated. It's good that she did remarry and have children. Third story. I loaded the dishwasher incorrectly, and she didn't like that. One night I was loading it and she didn't like how the cookie sheets were in there. I may have mentioned how she was being an insufferable bitch, and then all of a sudden I was a lazy drunk. Then somehow that turned into how marrying me was the biggest mistake of her life, and I turned that shit back around on her and told her that marrying her was the biggest mistake of my life, etc. I moved out and sent her a divorce. Fourth story. I was raised in a cult and moved out with my first girlfriend the night before I became 18 years old. I've always been told that my purpose in life is to make other people happy. She inquired, and I said that it did. She was violent both physically and verbally and emotionally. In essence, I was a maid. I took care of all the cleaning, laundry, yard work, cooking, making sure the bills were paid, and working a full-time job. She also had affairs with 4 different men, as far as I know. She threatened to kill me and herself if I ever left, which made me incredibly frightened to do so. I prepared her supper one day, and she threw it in the trash after slapping me because she didn't like it. At that point, I knew enough was enough, and I moved out. Fifth story. The foundation we had wasn't the strongest, to begin with. But over the years, I found out that before we were married, she was an escort. On her phone, I also discovered a number of dating apps and some questionable discussions with her ex-boyfriend. She declined to see me for counseling because she didn't want to be told that she was at fault for the issue. Whatever. I'm now content. Sixth story. When I finally understood that I couldn't be unhappy for the rest of my life, I divorced my wife. Marriage requires 2 people to succeed, and we never had that sense of cooperation from the start. For 2 of the 4 years we shared a home, I asked myself, is this how the rest of my life is going to be like, every morning? It was draining, and nothing I ever achieved was good enough. Numerous arguments were made, and most of the conclusions revolved around the notion that I don't respect her enough. We had good days when we did not argue, in my opinion. I now see that our sexual compatibility was the cause of all of our issues. She rejected the notion when I recommended going to a couples therapist to help us communicate better. She would always say the right things out loud, but her actions were never consistent. Looking back, I believe she was just as unhappy as I was, but refused to accept it for the sake of society. I didn't tell my friends or family about anything that was going on in my marriage. I kept it all to myself. I was simply too worn out in the end. Seventh story. I've been married to my wife for 15 years. We were constantly at odds. I believed she was judging me because she believed I lacked a sufficient opinion. She believed I was overly sensitive, while I thought she was being cruel. We had a long argument one night about Nordstrom's closing time, of all things. That was absurd. In the end, we allowed the desire to always be right to trump the need to care for one another. We ultimately decided it was time for a divorce after visiting 3 therapists. Eighth story, in the last 6 months of our marriage, she developed a severe psychological abuse problem. She was a narcissist who micromanaged my every action, isolated me, forbade physical contact, treated me like a mere extension of her life, forbade me from speaking to any women, forbade me from hanging out with any friends, and who verbally abused me everywhere. The list could go on, but it hurts to think about it. The final straw for me was when she declared she would murder me if I returned from work late, even though she was aware of my propensity for doing so. For her, it was a little too late. The following day, she also made a threat to hit me. This was the second time it had occurred, and when I told many coworkers about it, they advised me to leave immediately. I contacted a lawyer the same week because I had SMS with the threats on my phone. She consented to sign after I threatened to take serious legal action if she refused. Thankfully, there are no kids, the divorce was amicable, and I am content with my new status. Ninth story, my grandparents called me while I was at work to say that our dog, Zoe, who was sleeping on the bed with her, had been shot by my wife. She had killed my innocent dog. We were already separated before then for various reasons, but that is when I paid a few grand and hired a lawyer to file the paperwork. Really, I do miss her. The dog, I mean. 10th story, when my 2-year-old was just starting to talk, he would frequently utter the name of another guy. He apparently remained there from the time I left for work until I arrived home. Now I am a father who has had primary custody for 5 years. 11th story, already, we were not conversing. Anyway, it was the holiday. Even though I was certain that she wouldn't bother, I nevertheless made my daughter, who was 8 years old at the time, a turkey and all the fixings. After roasting, I laid the turkey out on the counter to rest. My darling bride entered the room, calmly threw the turkey in the garbage, and then left. For Thanksgiving, I had to drag my child to the King Golden Corral. It ended there. I was done. 12th story, easy answer, she no longer desired my marriage. When she started doing CrossFit, she noticed that the majority of the people in her gym were either single or unfaithful, which made her life appear less exciting right away. That's how I would describe the situation, at least. My daughter put the blame on her. She believes that we would still be married if we hadn't adopted her and her brother. It wasn't really a reach, considering that I have primary custody and my ex doesn't visit often. I wasn't sure how to respond to that. Still, I don't. Before adopting, our 12-year marriage was blissful. Now, I fear asking my ex to keep even the most basic promises to her children because I feel like I must fight tooth and nail for every dollar she graciously permits. I can't even stand to be in the same room as her. I never want to give my kids the impression that I had to choose between them and my wife, But I do want them to know that if I had to make the decision, asterisk, I would always choose them. And that's okay since I have no interest in wasting my time with someone who might desert their kids. 13th story. She was money obsessed and used credit and store cards without paying them off, which led to our divorce. She wants a wealthy man instead of me. She insisted our youngest boy sleep in her bed and would avoid me and not do so. Despite her methods, I believe the children I left behind have had decent life. She found a very wealthy man, albeit he recently dumped her. I regret getting married more than I regret divorcing her. 14th story. My wife was cheating on me, and this has now been proven. I made the decision to take this year to consider my options for my marriage in January. It's challenging for me to make a final decision, but I'm leaning toward divorce. If the prospect of spending the rest of your days with her makes you feel hopeful and in love, and you can envision the two of you growing old together, supporting one another, and working as a team, then continue to resolve it. If the idea of spending the rest of your life with her or him makes you feel depressed, insecure, and gives you visions of her with another guy, as well as a lifetime of wondering where she is in reality when she claims she is working late, the time for divorce has come. It's much tougher to break a relationship than to spend the rest of your life with someone who lied to you and picked someone else. It's a final choice for that connection, but it also means that you won't repeat the same patterns in the future. 15th story. We were separating temporarily. She moved into our apartment's extra bedroom. Although the word divorce had been bandied about, we continued to hang together and sleep together. Counseling, etc., was something I was seriously considering instead of divorce. She was in her room getting fucked by some random guy she met on Tinder until the day I came home from work at the same hour I did every day. He was unaware that she was married. I ejected him from the residence and informed her that I would be leaving as soon as possible. 16th story. She switched jobs from one where her co-workers were in their late 40s to early 50s to one where they were more her age. Instead of returning home to be with her family, me, our daughter, who was then 2 years old, and a cat that she simply had to have, she preferred to go out and hang out with them. There were numerous other minor issues that accumulated over time. Most notably her willingness to drink and drive and her habit of returning home 4 days per week after leaving without informing anybody where she had been or what she had been doing. She finally stated her want for a divorce after a month of that. For 3 months, I gave it everything I had. Decided to seek counseling, and the therapist questioned her, ex-wife. Do you think that this marriage is already gone in your mind? I finally got the response I needed after exactly 5 minutes of stillness. Divorced a year later after their separation, a week afterward. For the sake of our daughter, we continue to get along. But I will add that now that I've recovered from the first shock of actually going through a divorce after we both vowed to do whatever it takes and never get divorced, I can honestly state that I'm more happier. In contrast to how I would have been unable to do so had I remained married, I was able to accumulate money and purchase a home for myself and my daughter. 17th story. While she and I were watching Netflix on her phone, her boyfriend texted her. He expressed his desire to see her again at midnight and mentioned how much he missed her. She denied it when I challenged her. She said that my kid was receiving texts from her friend's daughter. My son is 3. The aforementioned daughter was 2 and hardly verbal. Yeah. The time to leave was then. 18th story. While I was doing the dishes, the police arrived and took me into custody. After being escorted to the station, I learned that she had alleged that I had assaulted both my 5-year-old son and her. Was found not guilty in court about a month later. Because of how chaotic the scene was, the police ended up testifying on my behalf. 19th story. She frequently became wilder and screamed louder during disputes since I always refused to raise my voice. Our 3-year-old daughter was upstairs playing during one of these arguments, and she started going down just as her mother stormed up the stairs like a child her own age. When our kid got in the way, her mother yelled, "God, I fucking hate you, move," in her face. My kid naturally came to me hurt. I made the decision to call it quits at that point. 20th story. After quitting a respectable position because she didn't get along with her employer, she lost her job once more. Anyway, after a few months, I'm handling everything. Yard chores, dishes, laundry, cooking, etc. When I'd ask the kids what their mother did all day, they'd reply that she played on the computer. The last straw was when I had to wash dishes when I got home from work so that I could prepare dinner. I've made dinner, so I tell everyone it's ready. Instead of our youngest child, who was 4 at the time and unable to serve himself, she comes to fetch a dish and serves herself first. I had an epiphany as I saw this happen. She obviously didn't want to be on my team, so if I'm going to do all the work, I might as well do it alone or find a partner to share the load with. 21st story. When she wrote about a fight we had on Facebook, her friends advised her on how to avenge me, including but not limited to poisoning me, beating me when I was sleeping, and severing my brake lines. She responded to each of these remarks with emojis and laughing. The 3 most frequent reasons for divorce, according to several research, are conflict, bickering, an irreparable breakdown in the marriage, a lack of commitment, infidelity, and a lack of physical intimacy. In 2020, Meta Harrison, a writer who also works in finance, was taken by surprise when her husband of 30 years requested a divorce. A mother of 6, she estimated that between those who ghosted her and others who expressed disapproval of the separation, she also lost half of her pals. We should always support our friends who are going through a divorce.